Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 9th episode of Soul's 2023 webinar series featuring presentations on ecological land care. My name is Julia. I'm a board member with Soul and happy to be your host today. I live in Ottawa, the unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. Soul's webinar series is held every 2 weeks on Tuesdays at noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern Time. This month's theme is Enhancing Biodiversity. You can find the monthly themes and registration information on Soul's website. This episode is being recorded and will be available on Soul's website and YouTube channel in the next week. Before we begin, I'd like to mention that this webinar series and much of Soul's work is made possible by the generous support of Gaia College, Canada's leading college for professional development and diploma courses in organic land care. Soul is also supported by its members, so if you haven't become a member yet, I invite you to do so. At the end of the presentation, we will have a 15-minute or so for discussion. If you have any questions, please put them into the chat. Finally, for today's presentation, I'm pleased to introduce Christine Earnshaw, a volunteer with Friends of Hampton Park. The Hampton Park Woods is an 11-hectare environmentally protected urban forest in Ottawa and a Greener Green Space recipient for 2023. Christine, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Julia. Many of you maybe have seen me before because I'm also with Soul, but I'm happy today to be on the other side and speaking to you today with Friends of Hampton Park. That's a community group that I'm involved with here in Ottawa, also on the unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe. So for today's presentation, it is my I'm happy to be here to speak to you about what we are doing as a community group. So who are Friends of Hampton Park? Well, it's a community group, sort of like a Friends of a Park group, protecting, enhancing, and promoting the ecological health of Hampton Park, which is, here's an overview. It is a city park in central Ottawa. And as Julia said, it is, well, 10 and a half, 11 acres. So 20, or hectares, 24 acres. It is a wooded area, as you can see from the aerial view. Lots of woods, lots of old growth forest, and some trees, some beech trees, for example, are over 200 years old. So being in Ottawa, the national capital, it is federal land, actually. So the National Capital Commission is a federal agency that manages some of the federal lands in the national capital area of Ottawa and Gatineau. And so this is one parcel of their land. And then there's some little bits of city land as well, but it's more the recreational areas that we don't really tend to. We're tending the significant part of the wooded areas and the meadows. So I want to give you a view. This is a picture, or two pictures of the interior part of the park. So you can see these towering trees. So it's like a beautiful growth of old trees, multiple deciduous and evergreen species. You can see on the left-hand side the spring ephemerals. So it's really nice when you can come to a site and you actually see seasons and you see the different colors in the fall, but also in the spring, of course, in summer and winter. And oh, now my computer is sort of freezing. There we go. So this is a view as well, just to give you a sense that there's topography here. And much of our urban environment seems to be very flat, seems to be very straight, seems to have a lot of great infrastructure. This is just the opposite of it. This is a beautiful natural landscape in the heart of downtown Ottawa. So I'm very happy to be a person who lives close by to here. Okay, so why am I speaking to you today about co-stewardship and what does that mean? And I guess I put the slide together to explain why we started as a community group to get involved even in this process. And when I say stewardship and co-stewardship, I mean community group together with the government bodies that are ultimately sort of responsible or those who are the managers of this particular piece of land. And one of the reasons is because the neighborhood is just growing. There's lots more people moving into this neighborhood, living close by. And even in the last few years, because of the pandemic, we know that there's been an increase of number of people visiting our green spaces. And this is no exception. And in fact, this is one that was highly used because it has a dog park, an off-leash one, but a lot of people also come and walk their dog there. But also it's just a tranquil place to get away and to get outside, and especially when we were locked down, it was a nice place to visit. So the community group also understood, and just by observation, recognized that there were a lot of changes happening to this park over time, a lot of sort of degradation happening. And so they did find the means to have a baseline ecological assessment carried out. And that was by an ecologist that they contracted. And that ecologist went around and looked at the things, the inventory, first of all, what was growing there, and then also what was happening, what were some of the changes and the threats to the woods. So that's one reason why we stepped up to say, okay, we have seen that anecdotally, but now we have this evidence and we have this backed up. We also came together because there was a willingness by government to work with community groups. There's a lot of stretched budgets, as we know. We know that community groups are much better to be those who are on site, those who are able to have eyes on the ground, knowing what's going on, and a willingness to get involved and leverage some volunteers to come out and do some of the stewardship was welcomed by those governments, as I said. Also, it was nice to get a couple small project grants to get this started. So I just want to give you an example of some of the challenges or some of the degradation. So this is around some of these big trees, but this particular area is highly used by mountain bikers who are not staying on the trail, the official trail that runs through the park in multiple ways, but is going and making these informal trails. And you can see the soil compaction, the loss of ground cover, the loss of the next generation of tree seedlings that would normally be growing up, and organic matter. So this is a huge problem, and it's just spreading. And if it's not taken care of, if nothing changes, then there's going to be a significant loss. So we actually want to reverse that loss. The other threats are related to things like the emerald ash borer that actually killed hundreds and hundreds of trees in the park. Only 400 were removed, and those are the ones that I guess were higher risk for the public. And so they removed, but that left a lot of light. And it seems like a lot of invasive species are also present in that park. And it's actually Japanese knotweed. For some of you who are familiar with it, once it's established, then it can build up into large colonies that really take over spaces. And a few years ago, there was also the LDD moth infestation, but that didn't seem to be something that was long lasting. So as I mentioned before, one of the threats too is from these, the increase in the number of informal trails that are taking over. So it's now what used to be like 10% of the footprint of the park is now about 35%, according to the ecological study, an aerial view of the trails. And that's a big part of it's displacing, or it's making the next generation of trees have a hard time to establish. Also fort building, off-leash dogs, and off-road cyclists. And nobody wants to stop fun from happening, and especially children's activities in the park, but we just have to be more sensitive about where they are and how they're taking place. So what does co-stewardship involve? It involves a lot of communication among key stakeholders, meaning so the government, city officials, and this community group. It also involves a commitment to ongoing hands-on stewardship activities. So not one-offs, but ones where it's an actual plan and where it's happening on a regular basis. And it is a commitment to do something over time. It also involves lots of activities for the neighborhood or the neighboring community, because that's where the volunteer support is coming from. And so it has to be, activities have to be put out there that actually inspire people to come out. It also involves a lot of leveraging of community partners, such as schools, city councilors, and community associations, and NGOs. So we work within a whole ecosystem here in Ottawa and even in Gatineau. And we're leveraging the support and resources from these community groups, and I'll get into some of those ways. Another important part of what we do is documenting what we're doing and what we're seeing, and what impact or results that we're seeing from our efforts. So that's really important, because part of this is reaching a broader audience, like through this webinar, but also through our networks here in this region and elsewhere to say some of the stewardship activities and how we approach it and how successful or what challenges we face. So some of the stewardship activities include, we're trying to redirect people on trails. So we dismantled one of the forts, and we were able to put that wood on what was the existing formal trail that's within the woods. And we're hoping to like block off some of the trail informal ones, and just to, with signage, trying to encourage and promote the idea of people staying on that one particular trail, or two or three. And it's not like people are limited. There are trails going through the park. It's a way to get up and close to various trees, or to see those spring ephemerals. It's really lovely to be in that space, and so we don't want to discourage that. We just don't want to have people branching off wherever they feel like it. On the right, I just put an example of where a tree that was more in an open area was girdled, and then it the tree is too big, and the city didn't have a chance to come back. So that's something that the community would take care of as well. As and before, like, this is a significant it was missed, obviously, but this is something that we would take care of as well. It just to show that the government can't do it all, so community groups step in. But our main activity, and this is why we were even inspired to turn to Seoul and say, do we qualify as a green or green space? And one of the things this community group is active doing is increasing the biodiversity in the whole park area, which is mostly wooded area, but also in the meadow. So how we are doing this and why we're doing this is because with some of that soil degradation, some of the erosion that's been happening, and the fact that we've lost areas because of invasive species that were present and that we've now managed to control and move away, we've managed to find spaces to plant some of mostly understory species and some trees in areas. But here's an example of a community group. So this is a high school close by to here, and they're one of the partners. So they have a greenhouse on their roof, and an ecology teacher, biology teacher actually, she has her class every year growing native plants for us. So, or for these parks, this park and another one. And so these are grown from seed with these high school students as the stewards of that process of propagating seedlings. And then this is an example where it's going into a native pollinator garden area. So as I mentioned before, a Japanese knotweed colony, that's been one of the things that we have worked very closely with the government officials. Sometimes they're very helpful in bringing crews in with us to work with us. And then this replanting project that happened following quite a large removal area. So here's the meadow at Hampton Park, and it mostly has Canada thistle, but what our stewardship model is to create small pockets of pollinator gardens within this meadow that are hopefully the seed source to expand the footprint and the number of species of the diverse ones that we've planted. And so far, we've seen a high success rate of the plants that we have put in the ground actually growing up and being able to hold their own against Canada thistle. And it's also something that we're hoping to control some of the dog stringling vine, which is also in there. But that seems to be working well. And we did just have an event on the weekend with something in Ottawa called the Wild Pollinator Partners. And it's a network, and it's a tour that's happening across the city over 6 months. So people are visiting these different pollinator gardens, learning from each other about what's working well, where plants come from, and how they can be sourced, and what species like pollinators are actually visiting. So one of the other things the stewardship model involves is public engagement. And we just find that knowledge is everything. And we are trying to build up the general public's ecological knowledge about the park's ecology. And so this is another partnership we have with a school that has an art program, and they have been involved in creating these signs for us. So Trout Lily, Jack in the Pulpit in French and English, and I think there's a Algonquin as well. And what they're doing is they're trying to bring people's attention to what is currently existing in these parks and why they're important species and where to find more information. And then this is a slide of different seasons, but also the ways that we bring people together. And there are lots of resources in our community of people who have special expertise or knowledge about, say, bats, for example, or foraging, or mushrooms, and different ways of seeing the forest at different times brings a lot of people in, and there's a huge interest and an appetite to keep that learning going and to be part of a community that is actively learning and learning to appreciate the local ecology. And then one of the other ways is the community events. We love bringing kids in. Kids just bring so much energy, good energy, and there's lots of ways that we like to increase their knowledge, but also inspire them to take action. So this is, yeah, we're here today speaking to on Soul's webinar on ecological land care. And so some of the guiding principles that we have that align so closely, well, first one is really specific to this area, and that is protect what's there. And so that this is a beautiful, ecologically significant natural forest in Ottawa. So our main goal is to protect what's there. But in terms of the regeneration, there is a lot to be done related to the soil health, related to the adding biological diversity and using those land care practices to do so. And I take a lot of that from what I learned from Gaia College, taking a course in Master Organic Gardening from there, and then working with people in this community group that have ecology backgrounds or other ways of having this knowledge, and we apply that all together. And another big principle we have is minimizing the environmental footprint. So we really try to keep things local. We try to have the plant seeds propagated from very close by, or we source from responsible nurseries right in our area. Or as I said before, we have this nice partnership with a school that is propagating a lot of plants for us. So that is helping to minimize the distance things are traveling. To reuse some of the pots every year is another way to do it. So those are two examples. And then the last one is being part of another ecology or a network to offer ways that people can get involved to learn, but how we can also increase this knowledge in Ottawa and share these lessons with other green spaces and gardens in our community and elsewhere. We find that that's an important part of what we do. So we take these wise words from David Suzuki, who says, and then this is what we try to follow, that when we walk in the woods, we tread gently and remember that we are both inhabitants and stewards of nature, and we are part of nature in our neighborhoods. So that's it. These are the contact information for, well, Friends of Hampton Park and another organization, Tree Fest Ottawa. I'm also involved.